Greetings and welcome to this edition of
Positronic.
I'm Barry P. Cook. I'm here to do a review of the premiere of Star Wars Andor. It was a 3-episode premiere, which I wasn't expecting, but that's cool. And I want to give you my thoughts on it. Before I do that, I would like to encourage you, ever so gently, to please give the video a like. Please think about subscribing to the channel. And hey, while you're here, make a comment. I'd love to know your thoughts on my thoughts. Also, I want to tell you about my Teespring store, where you can get t-shirts and other merch with the channel logo and other designs on it. The link, of course, is in the description. Okay, so Star Wars Andor. This is a new series on Disney+. It's a prequel, of course, to Rogue One, which itself was a prequel to A New Hope, which is actually the 4th movie in the numbered Star Wars movies, and it's very confusing. But anyway, it follows thief-turned-rebel spy Cassian Andor, who, of course, was in Rogue One, during the 5 years leading up to the events of that film. And as the first episode begins, Andor visits a brothel looking for a girl from Kenari who apparently used to work there but no longer does, saying that he's searching for his sister, which at first I thought might be a cover story. Upon leaving, he's accosted by a pair of guards whom he takes out with some alacrity, killing one of them in the process, and then killing the other, seemingly reluctantly as he begged for his life, before he flees the area. We next find him sleeping, and we see that he's dreaming of himself as a kid living with others on Kenari as a ship goes down overhead. Upon waking, he talks briefly with his droid, B, who tells him that his friend was looking for him the night before. He then heads out on foot to meet his friend, Brasso, to supply him with a backstory as to his whereabouts the previous evening that he should give if asked, which the friend rewrites humorously. A guard commander reviews the case of the dead guards and decides to play it off as an accident in the line of duty because of the illegal circumstances of the guards' whereabouts at the time of their deaths. Andor goes to visit a woman named Bix, who apparently is his contact through which he hopes to meet a fence to sell an item, but she's reluctant to reach out to the fence for one item ahead of schedule. In a flashback, Andor and others apply black face paint to themselves. Back in the present, the guard who was told to cover up the other guard's death goes about investigating what actually happened instead of perpetrating the cover-up he was ordered to perpetrate. When Bix goes off on what she calls an errand, her boyfriend follows her, but he loses track of her in the streets before she arrives at a location from which she sends a covert call after climbing into a kind of tower. Andor replaces the component that keeps track of a ship's whereabouts on the ship that he used the night the guards were killed, somewhat to the dismay of the man who allowed him to borrow it from a shipyard, seemingly off book. Back in flashback, Andor goes on an expedition with the others, leaving a little girl who may in fact be his sister after all behind. And that was the end of the first episode. As the second episode begins, we're in flashback, and we're looking in on the expedition that Andor went on with his fellows. And as they're walking, he comes across a giant crater with some huge staircases carved into the side, seemingly part of a ruin. In the present, Bix's boyfriend discovers an alert about Andor that Bix was apparently keeping from him. Andor returns home and lies to his apparently adoptive mother about his whereabouts, but she has also seen the alert, and it turns out that his being from Kenari was a secret that he blew when he told the brothel worker that he was looking for his sister, who of course is from there. He then meets with Bix, who tells him that the buyer he wanted to meet with will be there in the morning, as the boyfriend looks on before tipping off the authorities about Andor. Bix goes to visit her boyfriend at his place, and waka waka. The officer with a bee in his bonnet makes preparations to act on the tip about Andor. Andor takes his piece for sale out of hiding and sits on guard with it. In another flashback, Andor and the others approach the crash site. Back in the present, a man who I'm guessing is the buyer lands a shuttle far from the city center. Back in the flashback, at the crash site, there are several bodies, but one crash survivor starts shooting everyone, wounding one of the Kenari, and is then fired back at with blow darts until he goes down. In the present, Andor arranges discreet transport off-world, and in the process hears about how he's being looked for. Mr. B in his bonnet gives a less than rousing pre-raid speech to his men, and the buyer arrives in the city on a flying transport. And that was the end of episode 2. As episode 3 begins, we're once again in flashback, and Andor enters the crashed ship and sees his reflection in a highly polished console, seemingly for the first time or the first time in a long time, and he smacks at it with his spear. In the present, Andor visits his friend to tell him that he's leaving. Bix talks with the buyer on his way to meet Andor, and the troopers arrive in orbit. Back in flashback, Andor's adoptive mother and an associate arrive with the droid on the crashed ship where Andor was smashing things up, seemingly looking for salvage just as a Republic ship approaches, and she decides to anesthetize him and take him with them over her associate's protest. The guards interrogate Andor's adoptive mother and the droid back in the present, and overhear Andor talking to the droid on comms, which enables them to track his signal. Andor meets with the buyer, and Bix learns that her boyfriend ratted Andor out. The buyer seems to know a lot about Andor and says he wants him to come with him to fight the Empire for real. And as the troops close in, he blows some charges that he planted on his way into the meeting to take out the guards who were trying to breach the door, but they're not all taken out, and a firefight ensues as other guards close in. Bix is detained by some of the guards as she's trying to help Andor, and when the boyfriend tries to see what's going on, he's killed by the guards, but she can't get to him when they leave her because they leave her chained to a wall. The buyer and Andor try to make their way to the buyer's ship from the building they were in after escaping through a crawl space. Andor then gets the drop on Mr. B in his bonnet and interrogates him as to how many guards are present. When one of the guards who was instructed to go back to the landing pod tries to take off, he can't because it seems someone chained the pod to a large piece of equipment, which causes the pod to crash and explode, causing the other guards to be confused, thinking that they're under siege by the townspeople. Because the whole time they've been there, the townspeople have been banging on various metal objects to sort of, alert everyone that the guards are present, or to sort of make the guards nervous. And then this explosion happens and he's like, oh crap, are we under siege? Andor, along with the buyer, then escape on a speeder after distracting the remaining guards by sending a different speeder on autopilot on a collision course with them, which of course explodes and takes out a couple more guards. Someone comes and unchains Bix from the wall, and then have to pull her away from the boyfriend whom she tries to get to so that they can get into hiding before anything else happens. In flashback, we see Andor's adoptive mother leaving the crash site behind in a ship as Andor wakes up just in time to see them departing. And this is juxtaposed with a scene from the present showing Andor watching as he departs with the buyer. And that's where episode 3 ended. So that was a very basic breakdown of the events of the episodes. But I hope you can get from that a feeling for the intensity of what happened in these 3 episodes. It's very intensely depicted, everything I just talked about. It's all carried out in a way that has you on the edge of your seat the whole time and has you feeling uneasy the whole time. Because you know that Andor is trying to live off the grid, and that he's sort of right on the precipice of getting his ass, caught by the Imperials for one thing or another, even before he kills the 2 guards. And, you really get a feeling for the sort of crazy life that not only he lives, but that also Bix and some of his, and some of Andor's friends live, kind of, trying to keep their heads down, but at the same time make a living partly legitimately and partly, via less legitimate doings, as it were. And you just feel very caught up in it as you're watching, and very immersed in it. And like I said, very uneasy the whole time, almost like the Empire's breathing down your back. And that's due in large part to the pacing, which I thought was great, the acting, the dialogue, even the cinematography, which just very beautifully shows off the main setting of the show, which is this gritty, sort of rundown, I want to say Moss Eisley-esque town, where it doesn't seem like anybody has a lot of money or is living in any way lavishly. And, there aren't a lot of bright, sunshiny moments on this show in terms of, the look. It's very dreary. It's not very dreary, but it's, somewhat dreary. There's not a lot of brilliant sunshine scenes. And there's just a mood that's created by that. The special effect and the visuals of the show are off the charts. They must have dropped a buttload of money on this because it looks a lot better than The Mandalorian and Book of Boba Fett and Obi-Wan. So I just was enthralled the entire time I was watching these episodes. I think it's very well written. And, I think we're in for a nice ride in this first season. The interesting thing is that it didn't at all feel like a Star Wars show. And you might think that that's a critique or a drawback, but no, it's not. It felt like Blade Runner. It felt more like, one of those dark and gritty dystopian sci-fi movies that we've all seen. And I think the producers did themselves a huge favor by producing this show that way. It's a very gripping story, I think, that they've come up with. It's very serious and, I think has shades of real life because, of course, spies are a thing in real life and they, live these secret lives and always have to be watching their backs. I mean, I'm sure what we've seen of that in movies and TV shows has been dramatized and is an exaggeration of real life. But I'm sure that, a lot of these things that they depict are reflections of reality in terms of how, people in the spy trade have to live their lives, the extent that they have to go to keep secrets and hide their movements. And so I just think it's, got shades of real life to it, which you can't really say about much of Star Wars. And I think that just makes it very compelling. And I really enjoyed these first three episodes. I think, everybody should check this out. I wasn't going to bother. When I first heard they were doing a show called Andor, I'm like, what's Andor? Because forgive me, but I'd forgotten that that was the name of the character from Rogue One. And, I read the description of it, it's about a spy. And I was like, yeah, I don't care. I don't care. I wasn't going to watch it. I wasn't going to bother with it, you know. But then I saw the trailers and I was blown away by that. And I said, I have to check out the show. It just looks fantastic. And I have to say, I was not at all disappointed. I am very psyched for the rest of the season to see how Andor became an actual spy while on the run from the Empire for killing those two guards that he kind of had no choice but to kill, or did he? Because if he didn't and he was found out because the guard lived and told about him, what was that going to do? Apparently, it's a big secret that he's from Canary. I'm not sure why. It must have something to do with the crash. Because apparently, after that, the planet was abandoned. So we're going to find out all about that as well, I'm guessing. And that will be very cool. So, yeah, there it is. That's my review of the series premiere of Star Wars Andor. I will be back to review the subsequent episodes. Before I go, I just want to remind you again about the Teespring store and to please give the video a like and a comment and to please subscribe if I might trouble you to do so. Until I return, I wish you peace and long life.